my awesome students. So if you are watching this video tonight, then that means you are being a super responsible student and studying for your quiz tomorrow, okay? So you can watch the video, listen, write some things down, follow along in your journal. We're going to be talking about things that are in our journal from page 76 to 88. You can use the study guide that I gave you in class today to help you as well. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so we need to remember that we're talking about our big picture here. We need to remember what our big picture is, okay? And our big picture is how we can use natural resources to provide us with energy, okay? And when I say energy, remember we've talked this year about so many different forms of energy. And when I talk about energy, I'm talking about not only electricity, but heat in our homes. I'm also talking about fuel in our cars that gets our cars and our trains and our planes from one place to another. Okay, the one thing that all of those things have in common is that they're energy forms, and we get those energy forms from natural resources, okay? And remember, all a natural resource is anything that comes from the earth that we use. Natural means comes from nature. The earth is nature. A resource is something that we use, okay? So a natural resource is anything that we get from the earth that we use, okay? Now remember, I can take my natural resources on this earth and use some of them to provide us with those energies that I talked about. I can take those natural resources that I use from energy and classify them into two different categories depending on how long they take to replace. My natural resources can be non-renewable or renewable. You know that our fossil fuels, FF equals con, coal, oil, and natural gas, are considered non-renewable because they will eventually run out. And once they're gone, they're gone. We cannot replace them in our lifetime. We can't replace them quickly. We know we also have renewable natural resources. Our 5 forms of alternative energy, wind, solar, hydroelectric, geothermal, biofuels, they're all considered a renewable energy source because they're pretty much constantly there. We're not going to really run out of them. They're constantly being replaced, okay? It's that time period, okay? It's a quick time period, whereas fossil fuels is a long time period to remake them, okay? But the thing that they both have in common, okay, is that we use them for energy. I can use fossil fuels for energy. That's where most of our world gets their energy from right now. It's from fossil fuels. It's a very small percentage. Remember we looked at that pie chart, and only about 8 to 10% of the world actually uses alternative energy as our main source of energy in our world, okay? But the thing they have in common is they can be used for energy, and they're both from the earth, so therefore they're a natural resource, okay? So you want to make sure you understand those similarities and those differences between our renewable and our non-renewable natural resources, and the fact that we use them both for energy. It just depends on how long it takes to be replaced as to whether they're renewable or non-renewable. Okay, so let's make sure we understand the difference between our renewable and our non-renewable energy sources, okay? So we know we can get energy from many, many different places. The source is where it ultimately comes from, okay? We have non-renewable sources of energy, and we have renewable sources of energy from our natural resources, okay? Remember, our non-renewables are fossil fuels. FF equals con. Okay, we have fossil fuels. Our fossil fuels are coal, oil, and natural gas. They are non-renewable because we cannot replace them easily. We use coal, oil, and natural gas to provide us with energy. Okay? On the other hand, we have renewable sources of energy from our natural resources. Those are our alternative energies. Okay? We have 5 forms of alternative energy. We have wind, solar, hydro, electric, geothermal, and biofuels. Okay? So it's important to know this classification system and know who's renewable and who is non-renewable. Okay? So let's focus now on our non-renewable natural resources. Okay? Renewable natural resources that we use for energy are our fossil fuels: coal, oil, natural gas. Think back to way before winter break. We talked about how those fossil fuels formed. And the reason why they're non-renewable is because of how they're formed and that process that takes millions and millions of years to produce. Okay? When you think of how fossil fuels are formed, you always want to think back to that fun lab we did with all of the cereals and the coffee that we crushed up and put all that heat and pressure into that cup. Okay? Remember the key, the biggest key in that fossil fuel formation, and the coal forming, that oil forming, that natural gas forming, is that something had to die in ancient times. Ancient times means really, 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 really old, thousands, millions of years ago. Okay? Something had to die, like marine animals in the ocean, peat, those plants in the swamp. They died, they fell to the bottom of the ocean, they fell to the bottom of the river or the lake. That's the first step. Okay? Remember, that was represented by our coffee and Cocoa Krispies at the bottom of our cup. First step, organic matter died. Then, because of those lovely processes of weathering, erosion, and deposition, that organic matter started to get buried and buried and buried by sediment, more sediment, more sediment, more sediment. That sediment is covering it over millions of years. More sediment gets put on top of it, and on top of it, and on top of it. And when all that sediment piles on top of each other, it starts to press down on the bottom layers. And that pressing down on that bottom layers creates all this heat and pressure, which is what turns that organic matter into a fossil fuel, either into coal, oil, or natural gas. It forms in the layers of sedimentary rock. Okay? That is why fossil fuels are considered a non-renewable source of energy, because of this process and how long the process takes. It takes millions of years. If we run out of fossil fuels tomorrow, we can't just go out and make some new ones in our cup. It takes millions of years to form. That's why scientists want us to stop relying on our non-renewable fossil fuels and start using more alternative energy sources, because those alternative sources are always going to be there for us, and if we can use the energy from those alternative sources, then we will have a much greater chance of having energy available. Okay? So those are our non-renewable. Now let's focus on our renewable sources, those alternative energies that scientists want us to use so badly. Okay? We have 5 alternative energy sources: solar energy, wind energy, biofuels or biomass, hydroelectric energy, and geothermal energy. We've been talking about how you just have to have those 5 memorized. Use the prefixes and the base words to help you remember the meaning. Study those meanings, and make sure you understand each one and can recognize a picture representing each one of these alternative energy sources. Okay? So, let's pull these up. Alright, let's talk about them. First of all, we know the word alternative just means another option. And basically, if we use one of these alternative energies, we're using that instead of using fossil fuels. They're better for the environment, there's less pollution, and they're renewable. Okay? let's start with the easy one, solar energy. We know that solar energy comes from the sun. The key to remember about solar energy is that it's not the sun's heat that we need, it's the sun's light. Okay? The sun's light. Okay, it hits the solar panel, and that solar panel has cells inside of it that will convert it into electricity. Okay? So solar energy is energy from the sun. The sun's light hits the solar panel. The cells inside the solar panel turn it into electricity for us to use. All right, hydroelectric. Okay, hydroelectric energy. Hydro, remember that prefix hydro means water. And electric has to do with electricity. So hydroelectric must be electricity that comes from water. And it comes from moving water in a dam. Okay, the water from the river goes into the dam. The dam takes in the water, spins the turbine, which turns on the generator, which will then produce electricity to send to homes and businesses. Okay, so we've talked about solar, energy from the sun. Hydroelectricity is energy from moving water in a dam. Biofuels, also known as biomass, comes from crops, soybeans, corn, as well as animal waste. Those things can be burned and turned into fuel that we can use in our cars, and our trucks, and our planes, and our trains. Okay, so bio, remember the word bio means living or life. So it's something that comes from a living thing. So things that plants and animals are living things. Biofuels, keyword is bio and fuel. Okay, fuel we use in our cars. Most of the biomass, most of biofuels is used to power cars and trucks and planes. So we've talked about solar, we've talked about hydroelectric, we've talked about biofuels. Let's look at geothermal. Okay, geo, remember, means earth, and you all know thermal means heat. Okay, geothermal energy is energy that we get from deep, deep, deep in the earth's core or crust. Okay, way under the ground. Okay, and it uses those temperatures under the ground to produce heat in our homes, or it can be attached to a power plant and be used to turn into electricity. Okay, but the key with geothermal is that those pipes are underground, and we use the heat from under the ground in order to produce electricity. Okay, and then the last one is wind. You guys are very familiar with wind. You see those big white fan looking things, and we know that wind energy is produced from moving air through a wind turbine. The wind hits the blades, spins the turbine. The turbine is attached to a generator, which will then generate electricity that we can use in our homes. Okay, so hopefully this has helped you review. Make sure you have memorized these 5 forms of alternative energy. Make sure you know the difference between the renewable and the non-renewable sources, but you also know how they're the same. And I think you will be ready for tomorrow, and I can't wait to see how you do. So have a good night, get some sleep, and be ready for your quiz tomorrow.